Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and a tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another Roll20 review, my written and video review series where we take a look at the marketplace section of online role-playing website Roll20.net. With this video, we'll be reviewing the D&D 5e Adventure Bundle, Adventures from the Potbellied Kobold, published by Jeff Stevens Games. This review has been sponsored by the publisher, and a review copy has been provided by Roll20. If you are interested in a sponsored review, please reach out via email, Twitter, or Discord, or of my submission form at roguewatson.com. And if you enjoy my content, consider supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Some of you may be asking, wait a minute, I remember that weird, goofy name, Potbellied Kobold. Didn't you review this product last year? The answer is yes. In fact, I did. I reviewed it when it came onto Drive-Thru RPG, and I was quite positive about it. In fact, my verdict said that it was an excellent collection of short and sweet one-shot adventures. This is one of those classic anthology bundles of kind of mini adventures of maybe 10 to 15 pages. This includes 15 of them, ranging from 2nd level up to 9th level. Similar to something like Candlekeep Mysteries, but only Tier 1 and Tier 2, but very high quality from some of the best designers and publishers in I was going to say DM's Guild, but well, yes, they're on the DM's Guild as well. This is through Drive-Thru RPG, however, but that work in the D&D creative space. But now it's on Roll20, so I thought that perhaps we could take a look at the Roll20 version, and I want to differentiate this review from my other one, and I'm going to do that by ranking my favorite adventures from my least favorite to my most favorite. Now, something I mentioned in my original review was that the overall quality was very high, and I didn't consider any one of these adventures to be bad, which is pretty good. That's pretty similar to how I felt about Candlekeep Mysteries too. I don't think I had a single one that I thought was, maybe the couple bottom ones were kind of bad, but for the most part, I thought they were all, very good and very creative and inventive and interesting. And this one, I think, especially with the wide variety of genres that we get and the settings for all of these, a lot of them dungeon crawls, but not all of them. And there's a lot of different, genres and play styles and themes in play here, which means on the one hand, you're not going to get that one setting overarching theme like Candlekeep where it's all about books and book stuff. Instead, it's just really, that could be anything, although there is an optional campaign where you can link of those together. But if you are really interested in this, please do watch that original review because you'll get my actual proper breakdown, but I will show you how it looks on Roll20, which unfortunately does have some complaints by me. First of all, the fact that we're not staring at an image, we're staring at just a paper with the text on it is a big bummer, and the fact that this uses a lot of it breaks up all of the adventures into individual sections, which is fine, but then you've got these weird kind of map pages that introduce them all, which is really only useful for, I guess, I guess you could put the players on that map just to show them the title, but then we need art for that. You can't just have a blank paper. I don't like the look of that. So what do you get with the adventures from the Potbellied Kobold Adventure Bundle on Roll20? Well, you get the adventure, which is what we're looking at now, which includes all 15 of these mini adventures. You also get them all as add-ons, which if you don't know how Roll20 works, you can create a game based on one of these purchased modules, in which case it will include all of them in this one module. Now, that's great if you want to run them all or most of them, but maybe you only want to run a couple of them because that's kind of what they're designed to be. They're kind of designed to just drop in, as you need them. In which case, then instead you would use the add-on method, which is to take an existing campaign. There's a little drop-down menu where literally you can search for the individual adventures and add them in there. The only way you can purchase them is through the actual bundle, but I do like the offer that you can get them as add-ons, which was a initial complaint for Candlekeep Mysteries, but then Roll20 very quickly fixed it to where now you could get them as add-ons, because I think that's where most of us want these adventures, and how we're going to use them is because we've already got our ongoing campaign and we're looking at, okay, I want an urban adventure I can drop in here. I need a cave dungeon or something, and I don't feel, I'm behind or whatever else. Just give me some, or maybe I just need the map, like whatever we need, just let me drop that into my campaign, and you can do that here. If you get the entire package as one campaign, you will get 27 5-foot square maps. So they're all appropriately sized. They are full color, which I will show you what the maps look like. I praised the maps in my original review, so obviously the maps look freaking great on Roll20, which is probably one of the biggest pluses, although I do like the adventure designs themselves, obviously. But having full color maps is such a big plus, and obviously is the reason why I think you could even have something like this on Roll20, and those are included. Each one has at minimum one map, and some of them even have 3 to 4 maps, depending on the scope of the adventure. It also includes 4 new player backgrounds and over 50 player art handouts. Notice how I didn't mention monster sheets? I will get to that in a moment. It also has the Potbellied Kobold Compendium, which the Compendium is basically where you get all your monsters from. So this was a design decision made by the entity that adapted this adventure into Roll20 that I vehemently disagree with, but is to basically just rely on the compendium to grab all your monsters from instead of putting them in the journal. And I'll show you why that matters. But, and especially for somebody like me who's got literally everything on here, trying to find things is just a big bummer in this compendium. But they are there, and PK, which is Potbellied Kobold, is a source that is included. So when you first get the adventure, you may think the monsters are missing. You might even think that's a bug, as I originally did and had to reach out to the publisher about. But in fact, they are in the compendium, and that is how you get them. You have to drag them from the compendium onto the adventure, which if you're a Roll20 veteran, you know how to do this, but it certainly seems like a missing element for a pre-purchased module. It also includes the Potbellied Kobold, who enjoy po' boy sandwiches, maybe, art pack, which is on the other tab, where it includes basically all of the token art, which the original Drive-Thru RPG version included all of these tokens in a zip file, which was awesome. And I said that was such a cool thing to do. And so obviously they translate very well here to have them in a token pack ready to go. Similar to the compendium, you just grab it and drag it onto the sheet, and then you've got a token ready to go. Now this one does not have any character sheets or anything tied to it, so it's not really functional in terms of having all of that functionality, but it works as just a regular, token that you can then make a sheet for, do whatever you want with. There's a lot of art included here. What did I say? Over 50 player art handouts, and the art pack here includes over 100 character monster, as well as a bunch of letter tokens. So anything that's really included as a creature or an NPC character art is included in the art pack, which is nice to have. So I think we can go over these adventures, but like I said, I'm going to cover them in a different style from my original review, and I revisited them and looked at them through Roll20, and then determined what is my favorite and my least favorite of 15 adventures. And I'll try to go through at a pretty brief pace so we can get through all these, but you can get an idea if you think the overall quality is good enough for what you're looking for. At the very bottom, we have, and I will tell you the level. So this is a 3rd level one. This one is Redeemed with Fire. And the main problem I had here, show you, let's do the tavern. It's a nice little tavern map. Is it assumes that you've got this villain who's got it out for you, and they are manipulating scenes in this urban environment and basically trying to have you fall into this almost James Bond level death trap at the end with this fire dude and a bunch of fire creatures. And the story flow, it's fine. I think it's just bit off a little more than it can chew when it comes to these small drop-in adventures. And a few of the adventures have this problem, and some of them get out of it better than others. But to me, the best drop-in adventures are the ones that don't get too hung up on their own background. And I'm not saying you need to do just a no story, just straight dungeon crawl. Like there is some story you can do there, but it's a very elegant style in order to convey a pretty brief story and have it be perfectly self-contained and also have all the background stuff like matter in the context of a very small 12-page dungeon. It's very challenging to do that. Some of these do it better than others. I think this one doesn't do it very well, and then the overall it's not really as exotic or exciting as the other one. So Redeemed with Fire is my bottom, number 15. Number 14 is the Orb of Envy. This is and yes, I had to take extensive notes because this is a lot of adventures to cover. This is a 5th level adventure. This one involves a a princess apprentice to a wizard, and she got into a cursed artifact that turned her into a dragon. And then your adventure hook is actually to go and battle the dragon. And it's kind of a twist that you determine that it turns out it's a cursed princess. The Wizard's Tower is a neat idea, and I like, again, I like a lot of these maps. It's not as exciting as a dungeon I was hoping. It's mainly a lot of social encounters. You can kind of convince people to help you, and eventually you reach her. And then really, I appreciate the boss battle's kind of got that orb itself that you can attack to try and free her from the curse. And then that's pretty much it. There's just no real, interesting twists or turns here. And it's a pretty simple, straightforward dungeon crawl. So that is the Orb of Envy. Number 13 is Spare Parts. And, hopefully you'll stick with me, because I promise you these, I'm starting with the weakest ones. Spare Parts is an 8th level adventure. And this one starts off really cool, where it's a missing person, but instead of the person, it's a body. And there's a bunch of flesh golems in town. And and sure enough, you put 2 and 2 together that there's this, well, of course, the obvious, which is a group of necromancers have been putting on a flesh golem, like BattleBots, Robot Wars thing. But the funny thing about this investigation, it's all kind of bought and paid for. Like, everything's on the level, and people are buying for insurance plans, and so it kind of just peters out at the end in terms of this. You feel like there's supposed to be this big, nasty, like, twist in how everything's working, and it's supposed to be all, weird and gross, but it's really not. And maybe that's the fun twist, is that's actually, like, pretty a legit, like, fighting arena that they're working with. So that one ends up kind of not quite sticking the landing. That was 13 Spare Parts. Number 12, the Slime Cave of Norwal. This is just a pretty straightforward dungeon crawl. I like the slime theme, is pretty fun. The main thing this one has going for it, which I appreciate, it started off as like a Dice and Logos looking map, and then they actually did colorize it, and it made it look a little more interesting, is that the cultists try and basically trick you into thinking they're just fellow explorers in here, and they're not actually, like, it's not an immediately hostile cult situation. So you can kind of get let in and get this false sense of security as you're going in, and then eventually, of course, you get deep enough, and then all the cultists will attack you, and there's a boss fight with, the giant ooze monster theme stuff, which is always fun. But otherwise, it's just, it's a fine dungeon crawl. There's just not much of the more exotic, cool stuff going on it like the other ones. Now, you may be noticing in these dungeons, and Eric, okay, here's what the dungeons look like. They do have dynamic lighting involved, which I will show you what that looks like. Let's grab, so what I did is I had to grab this character from the compendium and then put them in the journal, because you notice there are no tokens or monster sheets in this journal, which is kind of a first for me. Whenever I saw this, I was so confused that I literally reached out to the publisher to try to figure out, is there a problem? Did I do something wrong, or is this supposed to be like this? And basically, through a lot of messages, it was determined that this was by design. In fact, I have a quote. So this is, I'm quoting from the publisher, who's quoting from the folks who did the conversion. The decision for doing this is because of the scaling option for the monsters, which is something that I included in my original review, by the way, is that all of the monster encounters have scaling. I haven't been opening these sheets either, which I'll get to that in a second, but which means, and a lot of adventures do this, right? They say, okay, this is designed for this level, and if you want to run it for lower levels, then here's our suggested notes for weakening the monsters, fewer hit points, or maybe a different kind of monster, and then here's the ones for strengthening, and there's literally like maybe a level or two off. So the decision for doing this is because of the scaling options for the monsters. We assumed it would be confusing for people to have multiple versions of the same creatures, and once the token's on the map, there's an associated sheet that is created. So they purposely left all the monsters off because of monster scaling. I would retort and say the correct solution would have been to put the default monsters on there, because first of all, okay, it's great that the level scaling is there, but these are still designed for a certain level. It literally says at the start of each one, what level it's designed for 4th level characters. Now, I do appreciate that, they will have the notes about the encounter scaling, but that's fine. You can trust the DM to look at the monsters and look at the notes and be like, oh, I want to scale these, so I'll have to, edit the sheets from there. Or the other option you have is, if you really wanted to, you could go the other way and put multiple sheets on it. You wouldn't have to do multiple sheets. You could do the same sheet, but just change the token life around. For a lot of them, just require like reduced hit points or something, and put them on the GM layer or something. A lot of official 5e modules do that same tactic. Well, they'll put, if there's mention of like different kinds of creatures or something or variants, then they'll include it just on like the corner of the map or something that you can grab. Basically, give me more than I need is usually the best solution when I'm buying a bundle. I've never before, and I've reviewed a lot of stuff on Roll20 over the years, I've never seen a product that just decided to not do the monsters and tokens on the map. So that is a huge ding for me, a big thumbs down. I appreciate that they had like reasoning for it. I just very much disagree with it. And I think the solution to simply leave them in the compendium is a huge problem, and that makes it a lot more difficult and a lot more work, which is too bad because the maps themselves work so well. Once you grab something, then it's added to the journal, and now I can grab it and put it in here, and you can see how the dynamic lighting works with all these caves, and the maps work great. They're just ready to go, but unfortunately they're not quite ready to go because you, after you purchase the module, have to then put all the monsters and tokens on there. I hate to harp on it so much, but it is a big sticking point for me and for this module, and it's a huge bummer that it was designed that way. I do have a major problem with that, and because it's so many really great maps that have no monsters or tokens on them whatsoever, and that was jarring for me. All right, moving on. The other, well, let's continue on. So number 11 is Into the Clouds, which this one I wish was bigger. It basically a carpenter gets kidnapped by a cloud giant, which is kind of cool. And it's for like, what is it, 3rd level. So, dealing with a cloud giant is not usually something you deal with at that level, and takes her up to his castle, and he wants her to rebuild his arm. I mean, all that's pretty solid. And of course it contrives a way, you rescue some potion people, and you can drink a potion of flying, get up there. And it kind of does a little bit of Jack the Beanstalk things where, you can deal with him stealthily, or maybe trick him socially, or just talk to him and maybe reason with him. But I just wish there was more involved in this one. It's fine. It's good. We're up to the, like I said, I don't think any of them are bad. I just think there's better out there than this one, but I wanted more of it. There's, it's got 3 rooms. Basically, there's one combat encounter with some statues. There's a nice little puzzle here, and then you've got the actual encounter with the giant, who you could sneak past, you could try to talk to. I think the biggest problem is it's a little underdeveloped with the actual giant, because there's no notes about, well, is a skill check involved with talking to him, or can we sneak past and get through him there, or something there. So that's a little bit underdeveloped for me. Number 10, 2 heads are better than 1. This one is designed for 4th level. It's a necromancer in a cave. Stop me if you've heard that one before. But this one does have a fun twist where the necromancer was, they're all about the body modifications, and through a hilarious accident ended up trying to create like zombie ettins, and ended up the creature killed him, but his consciousness flew into the second head of this creature. Let's see if I can find, unfortunately the maps, okay, there we are. Auburn's Cave, this one. I mean, look at how good I love this map art, is just great. And there's a really good player handout for this one as well. Let's see if I can find 2 heads better than 1. Where's my friend? Nope, not that one. It is this one. That's fantastic. The whole time, and it's a pretty standard Undead Cave dungeon. You just fight, which is fine. And then at the end, though, this guy is like screaming at you, like the whole time this giant ogre zombie basically with these weapons is attacking you. He's like freaking out and telling you to do things, which I think is a hilariously awesome twist. I love it. The fact that the necromancer is not the final boss. He is in fact a victim of what is actually the final boss. So that was a good enough twist for me to elevate that one a bit, and I like the cave map. After that, we go to number 9, Race for the Crown. This one, one interesting little caveat is that, again, some of them have that weird, like, there's a lot of background. Like, this one involves, like, warring kingdoms and orcs versus humans, and it's a bit much for a single, drop-in adventure, but I like the actual dungeon, and I think it's got a cool idea, especially there's, like, a bridge part to it. This is Cassons Prison, where you and the orcs are both going through this dungeon. There's a nice little puzzle here where you're flipping these pedestals to spell different words, and some of them are trap words that'll attack you. and then you get to this bridge, and the same time the orcs are crossing it, you can attack each other, and then hopefully you sneak into the final area. You realize you're both basically summoned to this thing at the same time. You're being manipulated by a demon who wants you to have both factions there, and then the crown is complete, and then you have to set aside your differences and fight the final battle. If you can pull that off as a DM, which is very tricky, I think, to have you fight the orcs one moment and then ally with them the next, then I think you've got a pretty cool battle here. And this one, it has all this background and about this history of these two warring factions. Thankfully, you don't really have to worry about that. I just think the dungeon itself works pretty well, and it's interesting for a final battle. It's a cool looking creature as well. This one called Race for the Crown, Cassons Prince of Chaos. Look at that thing. It's nasty. I love it. Number 8 is Tinker Tailor Goblin Die. This is the 2nd level mission, and this one involves exploring a mansion. It kind of plays on the Ghosts of Saltmarsh thing. With the beginning, it's a haunted house, but it's not really. That's kind of the same deal here, where it's you think it might be a haunted house, which there is a ghost here, but it's not really. It's basically a bunch of constructs and creatures you might not interact with at such a low level, like awakened trees, mimics, gargoyles. And none of them are hostile initially, although they have like triggers that can set them off and they can become hostile. But I like the exploration is really top notch, and it has a fun use of all these kind of unique creatures and kind of even telegraphs them. Like there's a giant tree in the dining room and you're like, what the fuck's up with that? There's a dining table in the greenhouse, which should alert you to the fact that that's not normal, and that is the mimic that's sitting in there. So I think it does a good balancing job with making sure it's not too cruel with its placement of all these animated constructs, and also the fact that most of them are not outwardly hostile. They're kind of like scared about the situation that they're in. There's another example of how just really good these maps are. Maps look. I just wish we had the tokens on the map. I'm just showing it off with this one that I grabbed from the compendium. Number 7 is the Instability of Isolation. This probably has one of the most unique locations for a dungeon that I've ever seen. It's really not even a proper dungeon. Like some of these are very much like social interaction locations that might involve a combat or two, and yet we still get all these nice big maps for them. This is like a retirement home for adventurers, and there's even like a zoo section for all the polymorphed adventurers. Like it's almost like maybe it's a half retirement home, half like hospital, I guess, where you would go, which I think is a really fun idea. That's not something that would even occurred to me. And it also goes into a really dark place because it uses a creature called a Skittering Haunt, which is kind of a spider version of an Ooblex, and it's been like attacking people and sucking out their whole being and then replacing them with these tethered simulacrums that are walking around, and it's all real creepy and interesting, and it's very investigative, and I think it works really well in that regard. And just having this very unique kind of it could be urban or maybe even out in the world somewhere, this kind of building. And it starts out, you're even kind of thinking it's creepy because you get the quest givers, like some like young sisters, like, oh, can you please check on her, she's acting weird, she's in this place, they're doing bad things in there. And the twist is that the people aren't doing any bad things. They're on the level. It's this horrible creature, or I think it's a pair of creatures that live underground the area that are doing all these bad things. So there is something definitely evil that lurks below. Number 6 is Blue Moon. This is the graveyard one, which is 3rd level. Involves a graveyard in a swamp that rises up like every 100 years and then begins to sink, and your mission is to go in there and retrieve the bones. This is just a really fun dungeon crawl that's got some, I like the idea of the dungeon that is slowly going away. I guess the water comes in, and there's actually progressively more challenging environmental effects that occur with that, as well as having to deal with hordes of ghouls and zombies. There's a friendly ghoul, gives you a side quest, and then behind you, eventually once you get to the end, there's a rival adventuring party that comes in and ends up being kind of the final boss fight. I want to pause right here and look at the other kind of complaint I have with the way that this Roll20 adaptation has been designed, but you can see right here that this is also something I've never seen in a Roll20 module. Every single subheading that exists in the original text has been given its own entry in the journal. So normally, when you have for example, a dungeon like this Blue Moon, what is it called? Gallon's Mile, I guess. You would have all the different, you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all those in one thing, and you just scroll down and do them. That's not what they've done here. Instead, you can go next. You can click this next button, which, you know, feels okay, like I'm turning pages and getting to it. The problem is in Roll20, notice how it is opening a new window every single time you do that. And that's not good, because that will slow Roll20 down. So I'm not a fan of creating all these new journal entries. I'm fine at trying to make it more organized. You know, you can separate your player handouts. You can separate treasure, maybe enemies or something. But I think this was kind of a misstep in the design process. Also, it makes it look really junky when you have like background 5, general features 2, developments 3, because every single one of these has, you know, similar entries, and so it has to kind of repeat those, versus you would have those just all under the one entry for, you know, the blue moon or something. So, you know, I think there can be a couple, you don't have to have everything literally in one, you know, entry. Like this is a waste of kind of space right here. The fact that it just has this little info, like some of these are not even, it's like sentence fragments, you know, in here. So that's a shame. The fact that I can go scroll down here without a single subheading, you know, is a problem, and that's a bummer. And so I think it makes it more difficult than it should be to parse this information out, which is why I haven't been clicking through things like I normally do. I'm just pulling off of my notes and from memory of reviewing this thing twice now on how these adventures work, because otherwise, and frankly, when I was looking at it, I would have rather, and I did this a few times, open up that PDF versus looking at it in Roll20, and that is another red flag. If you've made it that much more challenging for me to get the information from Roll20 versus the original document, that's obviously a failure of the design, so that's a bummer. All right, moving on to number 5. We're in the top 5 now, although, again, I think most of them are very, very good. Shattered Grace. This one does, this is for level 8, so it's one of the top ones. Has a very complicated background with its villain, and I think that does come into play later on. I love the maps for this one. It involves a Lamia, I guess, who's been, I have to actually scroll because it's so big, kidnapping nobles, and then basically kind of teaching them to be just rebellious folks, I guess. Kind of created a group herself that's kind of anti-corrupt, and there's a whole thing about the nobility is corrupt, and you can kind of worry about that, or you can kind of just enjoy the dungeon crawl, and you fight your way through a bunch of gnolls, and eventually that gets you the amulet that reveals her real dungeon, which is floating in earth moats above the old dungeon, which I love the way this thing looks. In fact, you can see, I've got it zoomed out to 50% still, by the way. This map is huge. You can see like the old, you know, Knoll Cave dungeon down there, and then you ascend into this upper part, and then you fight your way and explore your way over to the temple, where the twist is that she's not some evil monster who's kidnapping nobles. I mean, she's a Lamia, so she's kind of a monster, but she's been cursed. Like she's got like a legit reason for doing all this. She's been wronged, and the people with her very much like her, and you know, it's the other guys who are bad. So I appreciate that twist. That teeters on the edge of like, okay, you might have bitten off more than you chew here with the story, because obviously the context of going to that kingdom and dealing with them are outside the scope of this adventure. But I do really like this dungeon crawl. It's basically multiple dungeon crawls, and it feels suitable for the level that the players are at. Man, you do floating islands, I'm kind of sold by that. I guess I'm seduced by it, but I did think this one at least stuck the landing more than Redeemed with Fire did when it came to having this big, kind of complicated story. Number 4, TikTok. This one, you're transported inside a magic clock. This one could have been my number 1 adventure, and it was tricky for me to rate kind of these top 4, because a lot of them I really enjoyed. This one is such a cool idea. You explore. It's got a really cool map initially when you go into this house and you get all these clues together, and you realize you have to wind this clock to be transported into this clock demiplane, which acts as a really cool, very highly thematic dungeon, where it's literally, you can see it splayed out like a clock, and the things rotate, so you can only open up some doors, and if you don't get out of there in time, you get stuck in there. You know, it's a lot of things frozen in time, and gears shifting, and sands of time, and time elementals, and there's just so many cool ideas. The problem is like half the rooms don't really have anything in them. So I feel like it kind of dropped the ball when it came to how excited I was about the prospect of this. And even with that being the case, it's still in my top 4. Like, it's still an amazing dungeon, and there's a cool like boss monster at the end. The person you rescue is there, you know, and he's trying to stop you. But I think it's such a cool idea. I just wish they'd done a little bit better job of filling out more of the rooms and finding more meaningful things to do in them. But even then, I think it's an awesome idea. And obviously, a good DM can take this concept, take this map of this, and these are, and some of the top ones are the best ones you can use to drop anywhere, because I feel like you could just have any, a clock sitting somewhere with some context clues about getting transported inside of it. Such a cool idea for a dungeon TikTok. 9th level, by the way. My third favorite adventure is the Athenaeum of Dust. This one very much feels like it is ripped right out of Candlekeep Mysteries. You are transported inside of a book world, and you basically have to interact with, I'm still at 50%, there we go, 80%. You have to interact with all of the various denizens. There's a sand hag, there's a dragon, there's kobolds, there's a library automaton named Dewey. It feels very like Alice in Wonderland in a very good way. It's a lot of absurdity and a lot of interesting creatures and monsters to interact with in order to get your way out. So your whole objective is just to escape this one area that you've unwittingly been transported to because you just opened a book and got sucked inside. And it works very well, and it's a very easy dungeon to drop in somewhere. It includes 3 different battle maps too, which is very cool. My second favorite adventure is the Murder at Sable Mansion. This one is a awesome murder mystery, which is admittedly not the kind of dungeon I typically run, because it's got it would be a challenge to run, and the designer has actually created it in such a way that it doesn't work in terms of like a timeline of events. Instead, it's like, hey, here's just a lot of notes on these characters, and the murderer is actually a doppelganger who could be any of these characters, so it's just up to you. So it's a very free-form, sandboxy way of developing, which would intimidate some DMs and excite others. I am kind of both. I'm excited by it and also intimidated by it, to where I respect the hell out of it. I'm putting it as my second favorite, most intriguing adventure out of here. But also I'm not sure I would be able to run something like this, because it's got so many cool characters. I mean, there's a hag who's like the cook and maid. There's somebody who's a werewolf. There's somebody who's a secret ghoul. There's somebody just an alcoholic. Like, there's just so many interesting, and they all have different rumors about each other. They all know different things, and who's the actual killer here. And it's a lot of good fun ideas. It's just a very open-ended design that I think is bold but very, very interesting. And then my number one favorite dungeon is designed by MT Black, who I've reviewed several dungeons for and really respect his method of developing dungeons, even if they are very light on story. And this one is no different. The story is almost non-existent, but holy shit, the dungeon is so good. This dungeon crawl, which takes place in this giant like gear factory, reminded me of an old school like video game, like playing a Castlevania game. Every Castlevania game's got the clock level where it's the platforms and shit you got to deal with, and like flying Medusa heads, and that's on here. And combine that with like a Myst style adventure where there's levers to pull, and there's bridges that retract, and it does a fun thing where you pull a lever one time and it does a really good thing, and later on you see that same lever and you pull it and it does a really bad thing. There's a thing where you have to like cross through all these different like girders. You've got a little platform that goes along like a fucking video game, and you can only turn it like one direction. Like, there's so many cool puzzle ideas. I just think it's a huge dungeon too. What is it? 19 rooms for, compared to all the other dungeons, which are like 5 or 6 rooms. It crammed so much in here. So very much my number one favorite adventure from Adventures from the Potbellied Kobold. So there you have it. You've got my rankings for my least impressed adventures to my most impressed. And I think the overall quality is very, very high. I'm loving the maps. I'm bummed that we don't get the monster tokens on there, but they are available. They're just in the compendium. Let's go over my pros and cons for the Adventures from the Potbellied Kobold. Which, yes, a lot of them are going to be the same as my original review, because it hasn't really changed much, but some are going to be different. Pro, 15 short but sweet mini adventures in a variety of genres, playstyles, and locations. Probably the thing I'm most impressed about this overall product is just how different all of these adventures were from each other, which is what happens when you get a bunch of different designers and creators all coming up with different adventure ideas. There's the sheer variety of locations and genres. I mean, we've got a retirement home, like investigation. We've got a dungeon crawl in a clock demiplane, an outdoor dungeon in a graveyard in the swamp that's sinking in down there, a double deck dungeon crawl with a Null Cave and then the earth moats on top, and then a social encounter probably with a Lamia. There's like a little mini cloud giant castle. Just, it's, and these crazy clockwork things are so cool. Like, just the sheer amount of locations is awesome. Pro optional mini campaign that loosely ties 10 of the adventures together. It's something I didn't really mention here much. The Potbellied Kobold herself, who's is mentioned, she's a character. You don't have to use her at all. You can just use these as drop-in adventures. But if you wanted to frame them as a campaign, it does kind of loosely tie the 10 of them together. Not all 15, but 10 of them into a single campaign, where essentially she's the one, she's your quest giver. She's got this magic book that tells you about all these problems that are happening around these different areas and points you to them. And then afterward, during them, she tells you to get these certain ingredients, and then you bring them back, and she eventually can restore herself, because it turns out she's actually a transformed, like a cursed gnome wizard who's been turned into a kobold. Like, she's so friendly, I guess. So I think that's a cool idea. And Pro, it's available as a module as well as individual adventure add-ons. I do want to praise that, as anything that includes multiple little modules should. They should always be available as add-ons, so that you don't have to just make this one big campaign and then kind of pick and choose and delete stuff on there, because Lord knows you do not want to go through and delete all these individual things. Instead, you can just make or you take your existing campaign, use that add-on menu, and add just the particular ones that you want to add, and it'll just add everything like in the subheading, essentially. And then no matter what, you've always got the stuff in your compendium, so you don't have to worry about adding that stuff in, but you do have to worry about finding it. In Pro, encounter scaling suggestions and options for using Kobold Press's Tome of Beasts. There are a lot of cool creatures in here. You won't find anything official from the monster manual, because it's not, it uses the OGL versus, or it uses whichever one that doesn't give you the actual D&D rights is what it uses. But you will find a lot of Tome of Beasts stuff in here, which is very good, as well as a few original monsters. My cons, you already know them. The tokens and character sheets are only found in the compendium versus the journal. I find that a huge misstep and a big bummer, because when I buy something and put it on Roll20, I want to have everything ready to go. And not having any character sheets is not ready to go. That means I got to first determine what is in each room, what do I need, and then I got to go to the compendium, search for it, which again, for somebody like me who has a hilarious scroll bar, I'll show you for a second. Like, there's no scrolling through and finding stuff. It's me having to search for things. It sucks. Frankly, it sucks. And the other con is, I think the journal itself, even without the monster tokens, which would just be in its own subheading, presumably, is really messy and unnecessarily so. It doesn't need to be a different, subheading for every single one of these things. You can obviously make, some subheadings that make sense when you've got huge, we don't need to probably separate her equipment from her sheet and these kind of, like, I don't, having to put these as separated, like, just put that as one. Hey, here's how to link them together. Like, I think you could take all of this and at least have them up. And certainly we don't need it for the dungeons. You definitely don't need to have every single room have its own entry point. That's really not necessary, and something that I have never really seen before, and is kind of distracting with just how much length all of these otherwise small adventures take up in the journal. Final verdict: a messy journal holds back an otherwise fine Roll20 adaptation of the intriguing variety of drop-in adventures from the Potbellied Kobold. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel, and support my work at patreon.com/RogueWatson. Thank you.